This is International Network News, daily global news. Today we bring you in-depth verified reporting from the past 24 hours, covering geopolitics, armed conflicts, humanitarian emergencies, security developments, and international technology shaping the global environment. Ukraine faces intensified winter attacks. Ukrainian authorities reported a renewed wave of Russian missile and drone strikes overnight, targeting energy, transport, and residential infrastructure across several regions. Power outages were confirmed in parts of central and southern Ukraine, leaving hundreds of thousands without heating during sub-zero temperatures. Emergency services worked throughout the night to restore electricity and water supplies. Damage assessments indicate repeated strikes on substations and rail infrastructure, complicating civilian evacuation and supply deliveries. Schools and hospitals were among the facilities affected. Ukrainian officials said air defense systems intercepted several projectiles but warned that sustained attacks are straining defensive resources. Humanitarian agencies cautioned that prolonged outages could increase risks of hypothermia and medical complications among vulnerable populations. International partners reiterated support for Ukraine's civilian infrastructure protection. Diplomatic discussions continued on expanding air defense coverage and winter assistance as the conflict enters another prolonged cold season. Gaza humanitarian crisis remains acute. United Nations agencies warned that Gaza's humanitarian situation remains severe despite periodic reductions in large-scale hostilities. More than 1 million displaced residents continue to rely on emergency aid, with shortages of clean water, shelter materials, and medical supplies persisting. Aid convoys entered limited areas over the past 24 hours, but damaged roads, fuel shortages, and security restrictions slowed distribution. Medical facilities remain overwhelmed, operating with limited electricity and reduced staffing capacity. Humanitarian officials stressed that malnutrition risks are rising, particularly among children and the elderly. Water treatment systems remain partially non-functional, increasing the threat of waterborne diseases. The UN renewed calls for sustained humanitarian access and civilian protection, emphasizing that temporary pauses in fighting do not address the scale of humanitarian need created by months of conflict. Sudan conflict deepens world's largest displacement emergency. Fighting between rival military forces in Sudan continued across multiple regions, reinforcing what the United Nations describes as the world's most severe displacement crisis. More than 30 million people now require humanitarian assistance nationwide. Reports from Darfur, Khartoum, and Kordofan describe widespread food shortages, collapsed healthcare systems, and ongoing violence against civilians. Aid workers say insecurity continues to block access to many communities. Disease outbreaks, including cholera and malaria, are spreading in overcrowded displacement camps where clean water and sanitation remain scarce. Funding shortages have forced humanitarian agencies to scale back food distributions. International mediators reiterated calls for localized ceasefires to allow humanitarian access. Despite diplomatic efforts, no comprehensive agreement has been reached, and fighting continues to undermine relief operations. Iran maintains internet restrictions amid nationwide unrest. Iranian authorities maintained strict internet controls as nationwide unrest continued into another week. Human rights organizations reported arrests, injuries, and fatalities linked to demonstrations, though independent verification remains limited due to communication restrictions. Protests were reported in multiple cities, with demonstrators calling for political reforms and accountability. Security forces were deployed widely, and authorities defended internet restrictions as necessary to maintain public order. International observers warn that communication blackouts restrict access to emergency services and obscure potential human rights violations. Calls for transparency and independent monitoring intensified in diplomatic forums. Iranian officials rejected foreign criticism, framing unrest as a domestic security matter. Meanwhile, international organizations continue to urge restoration of internet access and respect for civil liberties. Red Sea shipping security remains volatile. Maritime security concerns persisted in the Red Sea as international naval forces maintained heightened patrols following recent attacks on commercial vessels. Several shipping companies confirmed continued rerouting to avoid high-risk zones. Military officials reported no confirmed new vessel damage in the past 24 hours, but warned that the threat environment remains unpredictable. Escort operations continued for ships transiting key maritime corridors. Global trade analysts cautioned that prolonged insecurity could disrupt energy shipments and humanitarian supply routes to parts of Africa and the Middle East. Insurance costs for shipping through the region remain elevated. Diplomatic efforts continue to reduce tensions and protect freedom of navigation, as the Red Sea remains a critical artery for global commerce and aid delivery. Global AI governance moves into diplomatic focus. Governments and international organizations intensified discussions on artificial intelligence governance. Amid concerns over misuse, disinformation, and harmful content generation, several countries announced reviews of national AI safety frameworks, while diplomats emphasized the need for international coordination. Topics under discussion include transparency, accountability, and safeguards against abuse. Civil society groups warn that rapid AI deployment without oversight could exacerbate social harm and geopolitical instability. Technology developers urged balanced regulation that protects innovation while addressing risks. AI governance is expected to feature prominently at upcoming international summits focused on security, technology, and global cooperation. Unwarns of growing global humanitarian funding gap. The United Nations warned that humanitarian operations face a widening funding shortfall as global crises expand. Officials said current funding levels fall significantly short of projected needs for 2026. Aid agencies reported difficult decisions, including reduced food rations and scaled-back medical services in multiple crisis zones. The most severe impacts are expected in conflict-affected regions. UN officials stressed that delayed funding directly affects survival outcomes, particularly for displaced populations. Appeals were renewed for donor countries to accelerate contributions. Without additional funding, humanitarian agencies warned that preventable deaths could rise sharply in the coming months. Extended short news and global updates. NATO officials confirmed continued coordination on Eastern security posture amid ongoing regional tensions, emphasizing deterrence and defensive readiness. UN agencies reported global displacement at record levels, driven primarily by conflicts in Africa, the Middle East, and Eastern Europe. Humanitarian groups warned that winter conditions are worsening access challenges in multiple conflict zones, increasing risks to civilians. Diplomatic statements reiterated the obligation to protect civilian infrastructure under international humanitarian law. Cybersecurity officials warned of increased AI-enabled cyber threats targeting government institutions and critical services. Aid organizations reported continued obstacles delivering assistance due to insecurity, access restrictions, and funding gaps. UN officials cautioned that prolonged conflicts are eroding compliance with international humanitarian law. Regional security forums highlighted concerns over escalating proxy conflicts and arms proliferation. International observers warned that misinformation campaigns are intensifying alongside armed conflicts. International observers warned that misinformation campaigns are intensifying alongside armed conflicts.